الصوت واضح. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. But can you open your camera? I cannot open it. So, Iman, would you allow us, please, to open the camera? Okay. Hi, Nisha.
Hi, Shireen. How are you?
Where are you on Earth?
I am in California.
Okay. I'm in Saudi Arabia, so we might be. What is the time at your place now?
It is 6 a.m.
Oh my God, 11 hours.
11 hours.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for being with us today.
No problem. This is a great way to start off Saturday here.
I know you love this. You love maturity, you love supply chain, you love sharing this and reflecting and having this amazing tool. It's quite impressive.
Yeah, I'm literally looking forward to this conversation. This will be fun.
Yeah, yeah. We are super excited to have you with us today. And we typically give like a few minutes for people to join. But I think we can start now to, first of all, I am Shireen. I'm here with you today. We have a great friend and a great speaker, Nisha. Nisha has been doing a lot of amazing work. She's one of the few people who are doing research and development in supply chain R&D. Nisha is our colleague from ASM, Association of Supply Chain Management, which used to be called APICS, because most of people in supply chain in our region, especially, know something called CSTP, CPIM, CLTD. Those are the most prestigious certificates for any supply chainer all over the world or a manager. And as well, there has been for more than 30 years, 30 SCOR, Supply Chain Operation Reference, which has been last year, was launched in September 2022 as new standards called SCOR Digital Standards. And our colleague Nisha, she has been part of this, part of the new SCOR. And finally, she's leading, or she's still leading something all over the world, which we all love, supply chain maturity assessment. How mature is your supply chain? And we invited her today to be with us. So, Nisha, please.
Awesome. Thank you, Shireen. Yeah, so today I'm going to talk about the supply chain maturity assessment. But first, if we can go ahead and go to the next slide. First, what I want to do is I want to set some context, right? So Shireen mentioned SCOR, and I think SCOR is super important in terms of really understanding the value of this particular maturity assessment. So first, I want to start with SCOR and why we need SCOR. And I'm going to take us through our top 10 supply chain trends. So this is a really interesting piece of work that comes out of ASCM every year. So every year, ASCM as an organization looks across the globe at supply chains in various industries to identify the top 10 trends in supply chain. So we'll talk a little bit about those top 10 trends and then specifically about something that is kind of becoming very evident in terms of importance in order to implement those trends, which is supply chain architecture. We'll talk a little bit about how SCOR is related to supply chain architecture, how it helps support supply chain architecture efforts, how we can use SCOR to really accelerate supply chain transformation. We'll talk a little bit about the SCOR tool set, the set of tools along with the SCOR model that can be utilized. And then we'll focus in on the maturity assessment because this is a free tool that can be utilized by organizations to really help kickstart that journey towards transformation. So that's the agenda for today's webinar. Please feel free to put any questions in the chat. If we can monitor that, Shireen, I may lose track of what's in chat, so feel free
Sure,
to stop me at
definitely.
any time.
No
Um,
worries.
so, so please, let's make this as interactive as possible. So first off, I wanted to start with the top 10 trends in supply chain. So what you see here are the 2024 top 10 trends. These were unveiled at the ASCM Connect conference back in September. And, this is a really interesting set of trends for supply chain. And one of the things that really jumps out is if you look at the first three items, digital supply chain, big data analytics, artificial intelligence, these are items that have been top 10 trends for a while, right? You see in 2023, they were also in the top 5. They were also in the top few in 2022, et cetera. So these are areas that remain very relevant and in many ways remain a challenge in terms of implementation from a supply chain perspective. The other thing that kind of jumps out is as you look at a lot of these trends, there are major themes, but there's also the idea of technology to enable these trends, right? So in order to actually implement a lot of these trends, we're talking about technology implementation. So how do we do that? How do we take these trends and make them real in our supply chains? Because that is where we really see the value of each of these items, right? AI in and of itself, yes, that's important, but how do we use AI in a way to really enable our supply chains, understanding our specific business requirements? This is where the real value is. So if we go to the next chart, as we look across the board at all of these trends, the thing that starts to jump out, and this is why this was named the overall theme for the top 10 trends this year, is this idea of supply chain architecture. So going back to this idea that a lot of this requires technology implementation. Well, in order to implement these technologies, in order to really make best use of these supply chain trends, what is really needed is a robust supply chain architecture. So what does that mean? That's a fancy word, but when we peel back the layers of that, what we're really talking about is understanding our supply chain business and strategic requirements. We need to be able to articulate those requirements in an industry standard way. And we need to understand how any new technologies, any new capabilities would impact those requirements. How do we need to structure the supply chain internally so that we can actually adopt these technologies in a manner that's beneficial for our business? And that's ultimately the missing ingredient in terms of how do we do these types of implementations? How do we make best use of these top 10 trends? And that's where SCOR comes into play. So if we go to the next chart, I want to really emphasize SCOR as a framework for supply chain. So as we go through these efforts in terms of defining our supply chain architecture, in terms of making sure we have a firm understanding of the business and strategic requirements for our supply chains, SCOR is the reference model to help us do that. It is the framework to help us do that. And I know many of you on this webinar may be familiar with SCOR. If you'd like to learn more about SCOR, please use the QR code that's here on the bottom left. Where that takes you is it takes you to some ASCM resources that provide a free SCOR training class. It's a 3-hour module. It provides you a link to the actual SCOR reference model. So really encourage you to play around with that, to look at the SCOR reference. It provides you with information on case studies as well. So definitely encourage you to take a look at that QR code. From a high level perspective, what SCOR includes is it focuses on 4 key areas. It focuses on performance, process, best practices, and skills for supply chain. So you can think of it as almost a standard reference, a dictionary, an encyclopedia in these 4 areas for supply chain. So it helps us to do benchmarking, right? So what SCOR contains is a standard set of metrics for supply chain. So you can use that standard set of metrics to benchmark yourselves. It contains a standard set of processes for supply chain. So you can start to look at these processes, see, how your company implements these processes, develop your process mapping, all then backed by an industry standard. Contains a set of best practices. So it includes the comprehensive set of best practices for supply chain. And here again, it's an opportunity to look through those best practices, identify which are applicable to your supply chain, and consider implementation. And then the last piece, very important piece, it contains a set of skills. So it identifies which skills are important for supply chain. And the real power of SCOR is that it allows for cross-referencing. So you can look at the model, you can identify a supply chain process, and for that particular process, it helps you identify what are the key metrics, what are the key skills, what are the best practices. So
and
really,
I think, Nisha, if you allow me, we need to identify here that every company has group of supply chains, not only one supply chain. One of them could be make to stock to maybe to local and make to stock export. Every one of them has different targets and KPIs and performance. And this is the real power of SCOR, because it can help you if you are engineer to order or make to stock or make to order or assemble to order. Your company might have 8, 10, 20 supply chains. For each supply chain, you can have, as you mentioned, which KPIs, you can do your own internal or external benchmarking. You do the process improvement by supply chain. And that's a real powerful, powerful value of using SCOR. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and what's really nice is SCOR is kind of this universal reference model. The power in it comes as you apply it to your business, right? So to Shireen's point. So you may have 3 or 4 different supply chains. This model can be used for all of those, and it can help you identify the differentiators in all of those, the real impacts to your operating model and the way that you do business. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So some additional reference sources. If you would like to get started on how do I use SCOR, how do I quickly get my mind around SCOR, one of the things that I really recommend is the quick reference guide. So the quick reference guide, and you can see the link right there, it basically provides you kind of in a single page view all of our SCOR processes down to the lowest level that's in the model. It also provides you a high-level view of the SCOR metrics. So take a look at that. There's also a comparison document. So for any of you that are familiar with SCOR version 12, as Shireen mentioned earlier, we did come out with SCOR Digital Standard in September of last year. So there are some additional process areas, some differences in the SCOR Digital Standard. So if you want to have a look at what are some of those differences, if you're a user of the previous version of SCOR, there's also a comparison document. So just some additional reference sources. There's a QR code. Please take a look and familiarize yourself. Go ahead. So to that end, we did have a pretty big update to SCOR last year. So SCOR has been around for a long time. So SCOR, the first version, I believe, came out in the early 90s. And since then, there have been several updates. So one of the nice things about SCOR is that it is managed by ASCM through a consortium of industry partners. And we have a lot of different companies and a lot of different sectors that are involved with any updates to the model. And the idea is to keep this model relevant over time. So certainly supply chains have changed a lot since the early 90s. And we wanted to make sure that SCOR is still a reference that can be utilized across the board. And so we had the biggest update to SCOR ever last year. And really, this update to SCOR has really been focused on the digital nature of supply chains. It's been focused on trying to ensure that SCOR is applicable not just to supply chains that are traditionally manufacturing oriented, but also oriented towards more service supply chains. And then the other big piece of this has been sustainability and really embedding the concept of sustainability into the reference model. The other item I would mention is orchestrate. So this idea that supply chain orchestration is kind of the key element in order to make the supply chain function. So how do we connect the supply chain multi-directionally, both within the different process areas of supply chain, so connecting plan with source, with return, with order, et cetera. And then also, how do we connect the supply chain with the outside business? How do we connect it to the finance organization? How do we connect it to HR, et cetera? How do we connect it to our customers, to our suppliers? So really the addition of orchestrate has been key. From a high-level view, here are the process areas that are in SCOR. So this will give you a sense of what's in the model. And when we say that SCOR is an end-to-end reference model, you can kind of get a feel of that here, right? So you have things that are all the way focused on planning. So how do you plan your supply chain? How do you do S&OP, demand supply planning? All of those aspects, ordering, sourcing, transform, fulfill, return, all of those kind of core supply chain pieces. And then you have the orchestrate section that sits kind of above all of that and helps to link all of that. So you have things like supply chain strategy. You have things like supply chain segmentation. So understanding the different segments of your supply chain and how those need to be set up. Network design, data information technology, regulatory compliance, circularity. So all of those aspects are part of orchestrate. So this is a nice view to help you see kind of the breadth of the SCOR model. And this one is also one that I'll emphasize as we talk about the maturity assessment. The maturity assessment that we've developed is really based on this view of processes. We've tried to develop an end-to-end assessment that's based on these SCOR level 2 processes. So these are the kinds of areas that you'll see pop up in that maturity assessment. Next slide, please. So when we talk about SCOR, one of the things that Shireen brought up was how we actually implement SCOR for your specific supply chain. And, those metrics, those targets may look different based on your supply chain type. And as we think about implementing SCOR, we have this 5-step process that we can utilize to implement SCOR. And this 5-step process, what's nice is that conceptually it's fairly simple. If we think about using SCOR to help transform your supply chain, where we need to start is first at a level of engagement. We need to make sure that the organization understands what is the case for transformation, what is SCOR, what are we talking about? And we need to make sure that the leadership team is on board with the type of process that we're going to follow. So that's the engage piece. The second piece is defining. So how do you define the scope of your supply chain transformation efforts? What are we going to focus on? What are our strategic and business priorities? So really important to set that scope up front. The third piece, and you can see the longest piece in this racetrack, is analyze. So analyze is super important because this is where you will do the in-depth analysis of the supply chain from a process perspective, understanding What are our current state processes in the supply chain? Where are the disconnects in the process? What are our metrics? What are the metrics that we're utilizing? How are we performing from an industry standard metric perspective? What are some of the issues from a metrics perspective? Taking a look at what best practices we're utilizing. What are we doing? What are we not doing? What are the skills that we have focused in on for our supply chain? What are some skills that we may be lacking on? So this is a very in-depth analysis of your current state supply chain to help you understand where we need to improve in order to get to your future desired state. Step 4 then is planning for that future desired state. So understanding these gaps, understanding business priorities, where the business wants to strategically go, and then identifying those projects that are going to help you get there. And those may be implementation of specific technologies. They may be improvement of specific processes. They could be upskilling projects. It kind of ranges depending on the specific needs that have been identified for the supply chain, the analysis that has been done from a SCOR perspective. And then step 5 is the actual launch. It's the development and launch of your transformation roadmap. So sounds simple, right? There's a lot behind each of these. And what's nice is that there's a whole slew of tools that can help you enable and help you conduct this 5-step process. And these are tools developed by ASCM. They're tools that are utilized by our partner organizations, so Symbios being one of our partners. And we can talk a little bit about these tools. I won't go into depth on each of them, but I will focus on the maturity assessment. So if we can just do a quick click through one. Okay, so some of these tools, so SCOR training and the supply chain excellence workshop, these are tools to help you in the engage phase of your process. So to help you
allow me, yes, if you allow me, Nisha, here to mention that we used to do TLP, Transformation Learning Programs, SCOR projects. And for clients, we were focused on the problems that affect the processes. And last time, I have been doing this with ASCM for years. And last time, it was really helpful that we use the maturity tool, which you will explain today, because always I sit with every supply chain manager, every leader. He tells me, I want assessment for my process, my tools, my people, and my system. So and here the tool, which is free. So everyone, if anyone interested to do it for his company, we will contact you and get your contacts and arrange to do a guided for everyone, because this will be a database for us. But with this tool, it helps us. Let's say a company maturity maybe at level 1.5, 2. And this explains. So we get the data, we do the benchmarking. We have been doing for years. A lot of work in transforming supply chains. And here comes a very basic tool and very powerful tool, because it answers the questions of every supply chain manager and supply chain leader. So this is a great value add. Thank you. Thank you. I would like to thank you for it.
No problem. No problem. So we have, to Shireen's point, we have a whole set of tools in this toolbox. The one that we want to spend some time on today is this maturity assessment. And where this maturity assessment lies in this overall process is really around helping you define the scope of that transformation, right? So as she had mentioned, you know, there's a lot of data, there's a lot to really try and get your mind around in terms of your transformation efforts. And what the maturity assessment helps you do is it helps you really identify from an end-to-end perspective, which are the areas where I should focus my efforts. Where do I need to spend my time and resources to really improve the supply chain? So if we go to the next chart. So here's an overview of the maturity assessment. So first off, I want to call attention to the word free. This is a free assessment that we are providing. And really the reason for that is that we're really interested in kind of helping organizations really utilize a score-based approach to identify the key issues and to start to work the key issues in their supply chains. So that's why this is a free assessment, and it is score-based. And when I say score-based, if you remember those level 2 processes that I shared earlier, what this maturity assessment is doing is it has really mapped back to those level 2 processes, and we've identified a set of focus areas that are derived from those processes. So in the maturity assessment itself, there's 27 focus areas that you would be asked to assess. Now, the way that this maturity assessment is conducted, the recommendation is that it is a facilitated assessment. And so this is where our partner organizations really get involved, right? So basically, in today's presentation, we'll provide a link if you want to sign up for this assessment. Any contacts that are provided, we'll send over to the Symbios team, and they'll be reaching back out to you so that we can conduct this assessment. We're recommending that it be done in a facilitated manner because the items that are in this assessment, one, we want to make sure that everybody has a common understanding of what we're talking about. So when we use the word S&OP, that surprisingly can mean different things to different people. We want to make sure that there is a standard understanding. Secondly, we also want to make sure that as you go about assessing your organization, that we're doing that in a fairly conservative manner that can help identify the key issues. And so we want to make sure that when we're doing the assessment, we're kind of using that more standardized logic and getting a score that can really reflect the maturity and can help identify those issues. So this is why we're really recommending a facilitated assessment. The time to complete the assessment is going to be dependent on the size of the organization, the size of the supply chain, the number of people that are involved. What we've seen work best, and maybe Shireen, you can talk to this as well, is what we've seen work best is that when we have a small group of people that really can represent the end-to-end supply chain, we bring them together, if possible live, and we go through the assessment, because what that provides is an opportunity to really uncover the issues within each of these focus areas, and also to ensure that there's a common understanding based on the different perspectives in the room. So that's the way that we recommend doing it. And I know, Shireen, you've done a few of these. Maybe you can speak to that as well.
Yes, usually we ask company to give us a presentation about what they do, their business, what they do, and we align on the stakeholders, and we plan a meeting to have them, and we go through the questions. Maybe we group them like short sessions, and sometimes this maturity assessment is bundled with talent assessment or supply chain talent assessment and small benchmarking. So in this case, we go physically, like we spend time with the client and do it. And we do it as a part of a very special package from ASCM. So if anyone interested to get free demo, we do like a free demo on supply chain talent assessment, how you assess talents in your organization. With what benchmarking, please contact us as well. But for only the maturity, it's free, but we do it guided online versus online meetings. And we have like 3 or 4 steps. Step 1 is that we understand about what you do. We as Symbios, that's what we do. We get to understand the company. We get to understand the business. And based on that, we go to the next step where we identify the stakeholders and which supply chain we are going to assess, because it's a maturity by supply chain, not for the whole company. Then we get the people into the live sessions where we talk and we discuss and we understand. And we always get opportunities, as Nisha said, because there is no consensus. People see different parts. Salespeople come and say, we do demand planning. We have forecasting process. Then come supply chain people, tell them, no, we don't have demand planning. Then I ask them in the session, what is your forecast accuracy? Everyone gives me a different number. Okay, then you cannot give them a high score. And this helps people to understand and reflect because it gives everything. And what is really I like about this assessment is that it puts more big weight. Almost 30% of the questions are on orchestrate, which like people terms, technology, data, performance, strategy. So you get people into a common understanding of the problem. And what I love always and say to people, supply chain is not one person problem, it's everyone problem. Even if you're in sales or finance or HR, supply chain is your problem. It's not only supply chain people, and it helps them as well to understand where to move. So that's how we do it, like the 4 steps. It doesn't take long, it's short, but to the point. Okay.
Yeah, I would emphasize what Shireen said about this is not by company, this is by supply chain. So it's very possible that for a single company, you may find benefit in doing multiple maturity assessments if you have different segments in your organization. So that I think is a very key point. And just that understanding that having that external facilitator can bring to an organization. Yes, I mean, part of the value of this is that you get a maturity score, but the other value that you get in this is bringing all of these people internally together to get to a common understanding. So that's the other piece that is key here. Once that maturity assessment is completed, and the completion of the assessment is through an online survey link, once those results are received, we'll be scheduling an output briefing. So a formal output briefing is scheduled. Sorry, can you go back? Can we go back to the previous slide? All right. If we can go back, the formal output briefing is scheduled about 2 weeks after the completion of the maturity assessment. And in that output briefing, what you'll be getting is a view of your supply chain maturity based on the SCOR process areas. So you'll basically be seeing, and I'll show a larger view of this, but the green chart that's in the middle of the results and analytics, where you get a view of where you land in terms of maturity for plan, for source, for order, et cetera. So this view then provides you from an end-to-end perspective, where am I more mature, where am I less mature? The other thing that you'll get is kind of the more in-depth analysis for each of our 27 focus areas. Where did you land in terms of maturity? And then what are some next steps? How do I go from a level 1 maturity to a level 2 maturity? What are the things that I need to implement? And how can I start to implement those? So this is why this out brief is super important, because this is where the Symbios team can come in and really help you, not just show you, okay, here are your results, but also help you with, okay, how do I get to the next level? How do I improve my supply chain based on these results? The maturity levels are shown at the bottom. So for those of you familiar with CSCP, these are roughly aligned to the CSCP maturity levels for supply chain. The definition of the levels are based on SCOR. So when we think about level 1, level 2, level 3, part of the criteria for that is really those 4 SCOR-based areas, right? So think about process, think about performance, think about best practices, think about skills. So the way that maturity is defined is based on those areas. So as you get higher in maturity, you're basically saying that you are using industry standard practices, metrics, et cetera. You're going beyond the standard. You're truly orchestrating your supply chain, et cetera. So and these are all defined. So if you go to the next chart, there are definitions for level 1 through 5. So if we can go to the next one. Next slide, please. So if we look at what these focus areas are, I mentioned there's 27 focus areas in this maturity assessment. So here you can see the mapping of those focus areas back to the SCOR level 2 processes. So if you look in parentheses, so for example, the first one under plan, SNOP, maps to P1. So P1 is your plan supply chain process in SCOR. So this is where you can kind of see that mapping back to SCOR. And the assessment then is done at the focus supply chain level using these focus areas. Next slide. So here is the definition of those maturity levels. I won't go through each of these, but to the point I made earlier, the way that these are defined goes back to those four areas of SCOR, right? So here you'll find definition around process, around metrics, around best practices, and around skills. Next slide. So what is important, and I think one of the things that makes this maturity assessment really powerful is not only do we provide kind of that aggregate criteria for level 1 through 5, we're also providing you criteria for each of those 27 focus areas in terms of what constitutes level 1, level 2, etc. So this is an example. I've provided 3 examples here so you can really start to understand what's in the assessment to see if this is something that you want to do for your organization. So in this example, this is on the focus area for SNOP. So the question for SNOP is, which of the following best describes the SNOP process in your supply chain? So if you take a look at the question and you take a look at levels 1 through 5, you can see that each level is defined. And the way that it's defined, it's talking about the process that's utilized. It's talking about metrics. So as you go higher in maturity, the metrics are more and more industry standard. There's more governance. So that's another theme that you'll see throughout this assessment is in order to score higher, not only do you have to have processes, metrics, all of that in place, those have to be governed, those have to be orchestrated, those have to be integrated. So you can just take a look at this particular question and it gives you a pretty good view of the way that the maturity assessment is organized and kind of what you're asked to do in this maturity assessment. So the next example here is return management.
So Nisha, if you allow us to have a quick exercise, if we go back to SNOP and ask people who are with us if what level of their organization is, just write in the chat. Just as curious to know, I always love improvement. So it would be interesting. We don't just want to do it like, we could do it a poll or we can make it easily, just write in the chat where you think your organization is in a level of maturity. Okay. So we are waiting. Don't be afraid. If you don't have SNOP, you can write 0. Okay. Wow, level 5. Wow. Okay. It's great. Someone wrote level 0. Okay, level 4. So we have 501004. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'll say is that as we do more of these maturity assessments, one of the things that we want to provide is a benchmark for different companies. And one of the things that becomes apparent is that depending on the stage of your company, so if you're a startup, I mean, it's understandable that you're going to be less mature than, a Fortune 500 organization. And so one of the things that we in the future will be providing is that view of how do you compare yourselves to similar type companies. We don't have that yet because this is a new assessment. We're still building the database, but that's another thing to keep in mind as you see the range of scores, right? I mean, sometimes you think, wow, are we that far behind that someone's at a level 5, we're at a level 0? And in some cases, you know, there are other factors that we also have to keep in mind as we do these assessments. But these are some more examples. One thing I will mention back on return management, if we can go to the previous one. The other thing that this assessment does include is it includes an NA option, so not applicable. So certainly the intent of this is that it can be used across industries, right? And it can be used across different types of companies. So if your company doesn't do returns management, if you're a service-focused company, you don't do manufacturing, I mean, there's an option to say, you know, this transform question is not applicable or returns management is not applicable. Next slide. And then I think the next example is ESG. So certainly the intent here is to focus from an end-to-end perspective, but also to ensure that we have included aspects like sustainability into this model, which was actually fairly easy to do because those were part of the broader SCOR model. And since this entire assessment is based on SCOR, it's kind of a natural progression. So now we move to results. So what do the results of this maturity assessment actually look like? So this is a view that it would be provided as part of that results out brief. Sorry, if you could go back. So the view that would be provided as part of the results out brief, what you would get is the triangle view. The triangle view is where your company's supply chain scores based on the 7 SCOR process areas. So we would basically show you for planning, you are at a level 3, for order, you're at a level 2, etc. So you can kind of see the trend of where your company is scoring. The squares, this was what I was referring to earlier. It would be a benchmark. It would be for this industry, for this type of company, what do we see as the benchmark? Now, right now, we do not have that information, so you would not receive that view of the squares. You would only receive the triangle view. So you would only see kind of how your specific organization scored in this assessment. Okay, next slide. So this is the more detailed view that you would also receive. This would be across the 27 focus areas, what was my maturity score? So, and you can see the color coding. The color coding is by SCOR process area. So all the blues show your planning, your red show ordering, your purple show orchestrate. And this is a nice view because you can now see not just, you know, aggregately where I score for any specific process, but where are my specific deficiencies. So orchestrate is a great example because you can see in this example that I'm very mature for orchestrate when it comes to things like HR or risk and compliance, but I'm very immature when it comes to things like ESG or risk or business rules. So you can specifically see where you are more or less mature. Next slide, please. So then the other thing that you get, and I think this is super valuable, is this view of not only where you scored from a maturity standpoint, but also what are the next level considerations. So if I scored a 3 in SNOP, how do I get to a level 4? And that's what that view provides. And this is the view across the maturity levels. So here you can quickly see where am I a level 1, where am I a level 2, etc. What's nice about this view is that it's also color-coded back to the SCOR process areas. So interestingly enough, I'm least mature in my orchestrate sections, which is kind of what we've seen across the board. The areas of least maturity tend to be around orchestrate, as well as some aspects of planning. But this kind of gives you that view from a focus area standpoint. Where am I least mature? Where am I most mature? Next slide. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the part of the results that are provided here is that in-depth analysis, right? And this, I think, is also where, the Symbios team can provide a lot of value, especially if this is a facilitated assessment. So not only where am I currently, but given my company, given my industry, what do I need to do in order to get to that next level of maturity? How do I go from a 3 to a 4 in S&OP, or from a 2 to a 3 in forecasting methodologies? What needs to be in place? How do I start that transformation effort? So this is also provided as part of the output of the maturity assessment. Go ahead. All right, so in summary, why should I take this assessment? Well, it provides you a good starting point for your transformation journey. It helps you see quickly where am I weak, where am I strong.
Before you continue, would you elaborate more? Because there is a question, ask you to elaborate more about orchestrate, please.
Sure. So in terms of orchestrate, if you actually can go back to the process areas chart, if you can go back to the one with all of the level 2 SCOR process areas, I want to share what is all included in orchestrate, because there's a lot.
Orchestrate, huh? You need more?
Yeah, if you can keep going up back
yes,
to the
Iman,
SCOR.
Would you keep going up, please?
I think there's a little delay here too. So one more, keep going. Yes, this one. So orchestrate is that major process area within SCOR that really links everything else. So when you think of orchestrate, you can think of those processes that perhaps are not core supply chain, but are necessary for the supply chain to run, right? So if you think of things like strategy, well, where does strategy fit? I mean, strategy is not part of planning, ordering, et cetera, but it's the backbone of everything. It's what makes the supply chain run. Similarly, contracts and agreements, human resources, the data, information, and technology. So think about orchestrate as kind of those foundational elements that are required to make the supply chain run, and also those things that help link the various pieces of the supply chain. So what is the link between customer, supplier, and my organization? Well, I need to have the data, information, and technology. I need to have the contracts and agreements. I need to have good risk management processes, et cetera. So that's really the function that orchestrate provides. And this is why, to Shireen's earlier point, more than 30% of this assessment is focused on orchestrate, because a lot of what we're finding is, as supply chains mature, a lot of supply chains have gotten pretty good at some of those core supply chain processes of plan, order, source, transform, et cetera. Where we're really lacking in general, kind of across the board, is in these orchestrate areas that are required in order for your supply chain to run most effectively. Hopefully that answered your question, but please feel free if there's any follow-up. Are there any other questions on the chat before I go towards the conclusion?
Repeat again, come again.
I was just asking if there are any other questions in the chat.
I will just send you all the questions. Okay, someone can say, where can we find the 27 focus individual area maturity model? It's in You log on and we do user guided assessment. That's how you can get it.
Yeah. So it's in the deck too. So the 27 areas are in, and I don't know, Shireen, will you be sending out this deck?
Of course, we will. We will.
So in this deck, in the earlier chart, you saw that there are the 27 focus areas are identified along with the SCOR process areas that they are related to in parentheses. Okay, so basically then the why for why you should take this assessment, helps you get started on your transformation journey, quickly identify your areas of weakness that you need to focus on, understanding those next steps for maturity. The other thing that we found interesting is this is a great way to bring along the entire organization, right? So one thing that we've seen this used for, and actually we just had a partner use this at an offsite. So she brought this forward at their leadership team offsite. And it was a great way to get the entire leadership team involved with the supply chain transformation effort. It was a good way to bring the organization with them to build that momentum. And then the last thing, did I mention it's free? So this is free. It's a great way to get started without a significant resource investment. So if you are interested in taking the assessment, here's the QR code. You can fill out that quick form. All of that information will be sent back to Shireen and the Symbios team so that they can get in contact with you in terms of the logistics around the assessment. Next slide. All right, so this is my last slide, but again, would really encourage you to learn more about SCOR. SCOR is kind of the basis for this assessment, and we do have a lot of free resources around SCOR, so please definitely make use of those. Symbios is our authorized partner. They have a lot of knowledge around SCOR, a lot of experience around SCOR and SCOR-based transformation. So definitely please take advantage of that. And that is basically it.
Thank you, Nisha.
No problem.
So we are happy, as Nisha mentioned, to support your journey because it's a supply chain excellence and transformation. So ASM has been doing a great job, and we already have as well every year the supply chain talents. You have the supply chain, career survey, right, Nisha?
Yes.
So if you go to ASM website, you can get access to supply chain career survey every year, jobs and what's going on. I was one time flying from Europe to Egypt, and I had by accident some people from US. And here comes a lady who lives in Miami, and she said to me, I want to take CPIM. I said to her, really? She didn't know I'm ASCM partner or anything. And she said that it's requested in job. She sees always this is a request. So we see people, job announcements, they want CSCP, CPIM, CLTD, always ASCM certificates. And as well, there is as well the sustainability assessment, many tools which can help you to improve and develop your supply chain. So people say to you, thank you. Okay. So I'm just, some questions I answered already. I wrote the answers for it. Okay. So in Q&A, there is someone asking you, is there modules in SCOR reflecting measures for dynamic agility, market variability aspects? It's a question for you.
So I would say that some of what has been identified is looked at from a performance perspective, from a metrics perspective. Some of what we're talking about is from a practices perspective. So one thing that you can do is if you go to the SCOR reference model itself, there is a search function within the reference model. So if you're looking at something like agility, if you just type in agility into the search function, you can see everything in SCOR related to agility. And you would see that there is some metrics related to agility specifically. You'll see that there are some best practices related to that topic as well. And this is true of any specific topic of interest. If you want to see what SCOR says about that topic, the best way to do it is just go to the reference model, score.ascm.org, type into the search bar whatever topic you have, and it'll show you where that appears in the model from a people perspective, from a process perspective, skills, practices, etc.
Yes, I'm sorry. Someone is asking about what cost of training, score, and duration. Okay. Someone is asking, so I will answer the cost at the end, but there is a question for you, Ahmed Samir. Is the SCOR include any logistics and warehouses?
Yeah, so warehousing is part of the SCOR model. So if you look at the fulfill section of SCOR, you'll see quite a bit focused on the logistics and warehousing pieces.
And I would like to highlight here that we don't have a reference for processes in terms of logistics and warehousing. And I had a big warehousing and project and logistics. I used the SCOR to help my client understand the processes, the best practices, the planning for logistics, and as well as skills and training for people, because we always have this problem. Usually, the level of people and training and investment in warehousing and logistics are not as much as other areas of supply chain and planning as well. So planning for the order, planning for logistics, planning for shipping, what best practices, what training, yes, the SCOR covers it all. Okay? Because it gives you complete perspective on supply chain end to end. Okay? So I think that's it. The last question about cost of training, SCOR, and duration. SCOR is you get certified from ASCM because you get a certificate and you get this badge and you get everything after you finish it. No exam. Usually we do it in 2 days, half days, face-to-face for a company or for a team, or we do it online, 5 to 6 sessions, depending on their maturity. And for SCOR, usually the normal price for it is $1,500, sometimes $1,250. But we became a premier elite partner for ASCM, so we can give bigger discount, and we are giving it for $950 only $950. Okay, so it's a great course for everyone who has a career and he wants to plan his future to lead supply chain. SCOR is a must-know skill. Okay, so some people just say thank you, thank you, thank you. So you get so many thank you, Anisha. So we thank you. Wake up so late to be
Thank
with
you
us.
for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Okay, so many thank you. Thank you for investing the time with us. And this is a little thank you from us.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming, being with us and spending the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you, Nisha. Thank you, everyone who is with us today. We wish you the best and see you next Saturday. Okay?
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.